Good morning. We are live, or as live as you can get in cyberspace, and hopefully free of glitches. This morning, I am talking to Corinne Zupko with her new book, and I'm finding it to be uh, a really insightful book that gives you a lot of tools to work with, especially if you're, a person who does have anxiety attacks, who has insecurity issues and fear issues and all of those things. How are you this morning, Corinne?
I'm well, thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited for our conversation today.
Yeah, I don't have a huge following, but I do have, people who like to share. And I think that's the beauty of a lot of the dialogue I have with different individuals about the course is that they like to get the ideas out there. And of course, that's what your book is all about, is getting relief for those of us who are still suffering from anxiety and fear and living in what we imagine to be the real world.
Yeah, yeah, it's true. And anxiety is a great motivator. It's so painful and it can be so uncomfortable and so debilitating. And so rather than seeing it as something that can hold us back, to me, I repurposed it and I let it be a really fantastic motivator to find another way. And so my hope is that for folks who do still struggle with anxiety that are willing to try something different, this book is definitely different. It's definitely different than, the traditional approaches to working with anxiety, for sure.
Absolutely, yeah. And the thing I found interesting was that, this is a process of your own personal journey coming out of a ongoing state of anxiety. And that began to appear in your life as early as the age of 2. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah, I joke around that I was born with anxiety, and I don't know that I actually was born with it, but it started very early on, and I just found that it really followed me throughout my whole life. When I was about 2, I was diagnosed with separation anxiety disorder. So my poor mother could not leave the room, even in our own house, without me freaking out. And although I grew out of that, with what we know about A Course in Miracles and fear, fear is fear. And so if we're not healing fear at its source, it's just going to take another form. And so as I grew up, it sort of morphed and it would come out in my, more when I was an older child, 10, 12, it came out as a lot of worry, a lot of obsessive worry and phobias even. And by the age of 12, I had an ulcer. And then from there, things kind of got a little worse when I got to college because that's when I started having panic attacks. I had my first panic attack the day, actually, it was the morning after I found out that a student who I didn't actually know died very suddenly of an illness. He was fine the night before and passed away very suddenly the next morning. And a question came to my mind again that I had always pondered. If God is love, as people say, how can a loving God create things that die? It just didn't make sense to me at all. And so that day when I learned about this student's death, I remember feeling a spike of fear through my body, and I calmed myself down to do what I needed to do for the rest of the day. But 3 a.m. that following morning, I woke up literally from like a punch in the stomach of stress hormones and found myself just gasping for air and shaking and trembling and thinking that I was about to die. That's what it felt like. And I was in the middle of my very first panic attack. So that was really kind of like my dark night of the soul, that period, that time period of having those initial panic attacks. And I just became willing to try anything to feel better because I didn't know if I ever would.
Yeah, that's a hideous process, and I find that I never really suffered from anxiety. I kind of was born with a somewhat lackadaisical nature, and so I encountered everything with that attitude of whatever, it'll pass. But from friends and associates and people I've counseled who have extreme anxiety, I have discovered that anxiety is, in the truest sense, a chameleon. It will attach itself to anything that comes into your field of observation. So it isn't anxiety per se as over a specific thing. Do you find that's true?
I really like your word of chameleon because that's absolutely the case. It sort of latches on to whatever your, for people who have anxiety, like whatever your hook is. For me, it was actually physical symptoms. I was like a hypochondriac. I was terrified if there was something that I felt that fell off, or if I had to go to a doctor to get a test and then, wait for the results. That was just a terrifying place for me. And so it might latch on to one symptom, but as soon as another one popped up, it was like, oh my gosh, let's actually fixate on that instead. So I really resonate with that word chameleon. I think that that's very, very accurate.
Very good. Well, now, as you went through college and matured even further, having to deal with anxiety, you developed a relationship and got married. How did the anxiety factor into your relationship with your husband?
That's a good question. And nobody has asked me that question before. So I love that question. When my husband and I were still dating, I remember being with him, and it was early in our relationship, it was like that secret, it was that part of me that I didn't want him to see because I was afraid of what he would think. I was afraid he wouldn't want to be with me anymore, that he would think that I was crazy. That was my big fear. And I told him that at some point. And actually, then when I was struggling with something, and it was probably the physical symptom of the week, I don't remember. I remember actually allowing myself to show him the anxiety, like actually let him see that state that I was in rather than hiding it, because the hiding it was actually kind of building it more. It was making it worse. And I'm a very honest person and really don't like to have secrets or hold anything back. So when I was able to just be open with him and honest, and he could see what it was like and he fully accepted me, I knew that, that he was going to support me and do what he could to help. As I continued and our relationship deepened and, eventually we got married, I did have, so my journey was that, with A Course in Miracles, I started studying A Course in Miracles when I was a sophomore in college, which was back in 1996. So that's when I began. And I found that it was giving me answers that I hadn't found elsewhere before. And so the anxiety would diminish, it would start to fall away, although it wasn't fully gone. You mentioned the word chameleon. I like thinking about a rusty pipe where if we sort of plug up one hole in that rusty pipe, it springs a leak elsewhere if we're not getting to the core of the fear, which is our belief that we're separate from our source. So although my anxiety overall was getting better, I wasn't really yet getting at that root fear. And so in 2009, and we had been married already for probably at least 5 or 6 years at that point, I went through another very significant episode of anxiety at that time. And he was incredibly supportive, willing to do whatever he could do if I needed space, if I needed to talk, if I needed somebody, to sit down and read A Course in Miracles with me. He was always willing to do that. So having a supportive partner really made a difference for me. He never made me feel crazy. He always was willing to practice what the Course calls charity. And this is key because this was something that my mom and stepdad were also willing to practice with me too. Rather than joining in my suffering, rather than saying, oh, you poor thing, I feel so bad for you, all three of them were willing to see me as if I were further along than I actually was. They were willing to see that light in me, that peace that was still in me that I couldn't access myself, that I couldn't know yet or see myself. They were willing to side with that. And therefore, the three of them were just such lights for me in my journey out of darkness, because they were willing to not buy into the ugly picture of me, on the couch, not able to get up.
Yeah, I think a lot of times, a lot of groups and a lot of organizations that are supposedly trying to fix problems in actuality exacerbate problems because they put too much attention on the cause and not any attention on the cure. A lot of cancer groups, a lot of various, healing groups, in actual fact, diminish our potential for healing because they reinforce the idea that you've got the problem. So now, Course in Miracles came into your life via your mother. How long had your mother been into the course, and what was her background?
That's a great question. So she had, I don't know what exact year she began studying A Course in Miracles, but it had probably been at least, I'd say at least 5 years or so before she introduced it to me. And she just really resonated with it. I think it was actually my younger sister that may have turned my mom onto the course. And my mom just always felt like it was something that could help me, but I wasn't open to hearing it until I was ready. I mean, you know how it can be with a parent and a child. The parent wants the kid to do something and the kid's like, heck no, because you want me to do this, I don't want to do it. And it was that way with A Course in Miracles. I wanted nothing initially to do with it until we were on the phone that night of my first panic attack, because I called her at 3 a.m. And that's when she said to me again, Corinne, you know, I know you haven't wanted to talk about this before, but this pathway of A Course in Miracles is all about undoing fear and remembering the peace and the love that's already in you. And I think you'd really, really get something out of it. And it was at that moment I was like, yes, I will try absolutely anything. And I just let down my defenses and opened up to giving it a try.
Nice. And so after that initial first step, um, what were you off on an adventure with as far as the relationship you had with the course? Were you looking at it in context with Jesus as its origins, as you know, a direct communication from a man from 2,000 years ago, or were you seeing it in a place of not really attaching it to an identity, but merely accepting it as an intuitively accepted truth?
I love that question again. Again, another question I've not been asked yet. My relationship early on was more of the latter, with not really attaching any, you know, figure to it. I knew that the voice was Jesus's voice, but to be honest with you, it probably took 10 years of studying the course before I was comfortable with saying Jesus's name, because to me, Jesus meant, you know, the Jehovah's Witnesses knocking at my door, or, you know, some group trying to push their agenda. And so I, again, just had a lot of resistance to that. So I was okay with that being the voice, but I couldn't say Jesus's name. I wasn't comfortable with it. So I really looked at the course more of just this, you know, channeled, incredible work, this pathway out of fear and out of inner hell. And it was only later down the road that I really opened up to having a relationship with Jesus. And the other interesting thing too is that my resistance was so high in the beginning. I say this to folks all the time because people will ask me, like, I fell behind on my lessons. I missed a day. I missed 2 days. And I'll say, it took me 4 years to get through the lessons for the first time because of my own resistance. I just wasn't ready to fully commit myself. And that's okay. That's where I was at. And I still got what I needed to get out of it. But my early years with the course also, I remember opening the book at random and just reading, you know, wherever my eyes would land. Maybe I understood 30% of what it was saying. There was a lot of it that I didn't understand, but the little bits and pieces that resonated with me were like that spark inside that just got brighter. Something in me knew what it was teaching, even though my logical mind might not fully understand it. So my beginning journey with the course, it wasn't like I was just this expert student or this really fantastic student. It was like on again, off again. I would only go to it when I felt ready. And like I said, it took me 4 years to get through the lessons for the first time.
Well, that's kind of par for the course. A little bit of a pun there, but uh, I have found that with the course, because of the density of it, a lot of times you simply have to ask for understanding and have that expectation that the Holy Spirit over the period of a day or a week will bring things into perspective, will reveal to you what it is that you seem to be stuck on. Have you been finding that that process of surrender is a way to accelerate your understanding of the course?
Absolutely. That surrender is everything. I feel like, and I say this at the end of the book, if I can boil down, the teachings of the course to one thing, it's withhold nothing from the Holy Spirit. Surrender it all. Be willing to just release and let go of everything we think we know and believe, and just open to that. You're hitting on a really, really important point, because early on, again, in my journey for years with A Course in Miracles, if I didn't understand something, I'd run to usually my mom and my stepdad, because they were both very dedicated students and teachers of the course. It was after a while that I realized that what you just said clicked, that I could ask the Holy Spirit. If I didn't understand something, I didn't have to go to anybody else. I could just ask the Holy Spirit and rest in that and trust that that understanding, whatever I needed to know, would come the moment that I was ready to receive it. So I think you're hitting on a very important piece for all of us, that we can ask for that understanding. We don't have to run to somebody else for that answer.
Very cool. Well, now you're in the realm of academia there as a professor at the school that you're associated with. Um, what are the boundaries that you have to work around as far as actually bringing up the course in discussion with your students? I mean, do you have a lot of latitude with that, or is that something that is verboten? Where in that grayscale do you arrive at as far as actually being able to introduce the course as a study guide to the students that you're exposed to?
Another great question. So I always, just like working with counseling clients, we have to honor where they are. The program that I teach in and the curriculum that we have, and where the students are, the Course in Miracles is not part of the the counseling curriculum. And although there may be times, for instance, in our internship seminar class, where students, they're out doing their field work and we come together in group supervision once a week, if there is a client issue where it seems like the client is open and receptive to more spiritual talk, we might talk about that. I've never actually really used A Course in Miracles explicitly in my teaching, although for sure I'm constantly using it. It's really internalized at this point. It's really my operating system, where even in my teaching, I'm handing over and asking for guidance in terms of how to answer questions, and what to say, and maybe how to work with a student who's having trouble. So it's very much an internal process for me. The interesting thing is that with the book coming out, I know that there have been a number of my students, both students who have graduated and current students as well, who've seen my book now in the campus bookstore. I have a book event on campus coming up. I had a book launch party already on campus. And so word travels. And again, the feedback that I've been getting from those who I've heard back from so far is that, wow, this is really different and really exciting. But personally, I used to have a lot of fear about talking about this in, publicly, because it's not evidence-based, it's not research-based, it's in the realm of spirituality. But in terms of academia, the counseling field is like the best field to talk about a pathway like this with, because counselors are so open-minded and so, they embrace all forms of how we can help our clients, including spirituality. So my department, my colleagues have all been incredibly, incredibly supportive of my work and of the book, and have bought it and are reading it, and have given me really, really fantastic feedback. So it's not explicit in my classes, it's more something I do. And if there are opportunities to bring it up, then certainly, I do and would.
Yeah, well, of course, the fact that Helen and Bill were both very, very entrenched in the world of psychology and were, people who had a very prestigious presence in that community, that also gives you a little bit of something to fall back on and say, well, this isn't just about the God word. This is about something even more profound. Now, as far as the God word, that brings us into that realm of non-duality and recognizing our wholeness within God. Is that something that you play around with, that you contemplate? Do you put a lot of emphasis on the idea that you are God within God, that there is nothing but God, and that's the entirety of existence?
Well, in my book, I say how, especially for folks who are new to this pathway, that when I say God, I'm not referring to a guy with a white beard who sits upstairs, and orchestrates things down here. I'm referring to divine love with a capital L, the love of the universe. And if you look at the title of my book, From Anxiety to Love, love, I say, you can substitute for the word God. So this is all about coming back to that oneness, coming back to recognizing our wholeness and our wholeness within God. So that's everything. And the more we have an experience of that, the more we are able to actually have, not just the intellectual understanding, but the actual experience of something beyond ourselves. It's in that space. This is where I get so excited. It's in that space that the anxiety falls away. We don't have to, as the Course says, attempting the mastery of fear is useless. It asserts the power of fear by the very assumption it need be mastered. The true resolution rests on mastery of love. So as we learn how to master love, how to have experiences of this divine love, it's all about that and not mastering our fears. Instead, the fears fall away as we have this experience of non-duality, of our wholeness in God. And so that's everything. That's absolutely everything.
Very good. Now, as far as your potential for future interactions and that sort of thing, is there any kind of a expectation of children appearing in your life, or are you just at that point of living in the moment and knowing that God's got everything planned out for you?
That's a great question. I do, and I'm assuming you're bringing up the question because the part in my book where I share that I had a lot of anxiety surrounding the idea of having children. It was very scary to me, especially because all the phobias that I had, with sickness and body stuff. And yet here I am, or here I was with my husband, and my husband was like, but I want kids. And so what do you do? What we had to do was bring both his desire, my fear, any ideas, any beliefs, whatever we had surrounding the idea of children, we had to bring that to Holy Spirit and say, you know what? This is up to you. We know nothing. So it really is no plans. It is just about trusting that whatever is in the highest good is going to be. And if we feel, I don't know, if we feel guided to go and pursue that avenue, I'm sure we would. If we, at this point, it's a moment to moment, just, constantly relinquishing and trusting that whatever happens in form is part of the plan and the bigger picture. But the experience of coming out with this, of course, people say this, and I don't know, not having given birth, if it's actually similar, but this feels like having given birth. I feel like this has been my baby, and now it's out there in the world doing its thing, doing good. And it's like, okay, bye. Like I've raised you, and I trust that you're going to be off and doing good in the world. And like I said, that's the feedback that I'm getting. So yeah. So to answer your question, it's just a relinquishment, trusting, and a moment to moment letting go. So no plans.
Well, now you've got a husband who is 100% supportive of you. What sort of world does he live in? Did he step into the Course as a result of the relationship with you? or did he already have some kind of a spiritual, psychological, course-related mindset before the two of you actually got together?
He was open. He didn't come from any particular spiritual upbringing, and really started learning the course through me, because like I said already, it's my operating system. It's how I think, it's how I work, it's how I process through things. So he very much started getting it just through our talks and through, our interactions, and since then has, gotten the book and done the lessons and studied it. He doesn't seem to necessarily need it like I've needed it, like I've needed the structure that the course provides. So I've been the one that's been a little bit more diligent to follow, the workbook lessons and to do the teachings. And he's more, checked in with it here and there since he completed the lessons. And we really, again, use it as our operating system. So he's gotten it mostly through me for the most part.
Very good. And is he a tech guy, or is he a professional, or
He's a teacher. He's an art teacher. So he uses his creativity, and he is an incredible artist. I am looking out my door right now at one of his outdoor mosaics. He makes these incredible, beautiful pieces of mosaic art. I would turn my webcam and show you a piece, but it's actually being shown right now in a gallery. It's a gorgeous mirror, and he mosaicked the whole frame to be this beautiful, beautiful pattern. So he's very talented.
very nice? A lot of creativity and a lot of you know acceptance that we are not necessarily beings that are individuals, but that we are co-creators in an ever-evolving universe that is supportive of our creative and compassionate, hopefully, activities in this material world.
Absolutely, absolutely. And that creativity, I think we all have to find how that comes out for us. For him, it's artwork. For me now, it's speaking and writing and sharing the teachings of the course. That's how I feel most inspired. It's what, moves me and moves through me. So I feel like all of us need to find whatever that is that we feel we can get into that flow and have that creative aspect of spirit move through us. The form of it might be different from person to person, but we all have it for sure.
Very good. Do you have any final thoughts that you would like to share? Anything that you would like to point out about the book that you think the listeners should be aware of?
Yeah, so I'll say just I have a few thoughts coming to mind. That I have a 6-week class coming up, surrounding, it's not a book study group, it's an actual class surrounding this theme of moving from anxiety to love. So if anybody's interested, just hop over to my website, which is FromAnxietyToLove.com. The meditations in the book I am so excited about, because I recorded them to gorgeous music and released a meditation album, the From Anxiety to Love Meditations. And you can actually get 3 of those meditations for free if you want to test drive them. On my website, again, it's FromAnxietyToLove.com/meditations. And I will just end with saying that I didn't think that there was a way out. I didn't know that I'd ever find my grounding again. I didn't know that I'd ever find a place of peace within me after having gone through what I've gone through with this lifelong anxiety. But what we are is love. What we are is this God nature, this eternal love, this wholeness, and we can't escape that. No matter how distracted we might be by what's happening in the world, no matter how distracted we might be from what's going on within us, that does not change the truth. It doesn't change reality. And so we can take a lot of comfort in that for sure. This process of waking up can be gentle, it can be joyous, and all it takes is that willingness to turn to Holy Spirit and to practice, the course, practice what I share in the book, or whatever spiritual pathway it is that works for you. And I would just like to end with saying something that my stepdad said to me when I was knocked out on the couch with so much anxiety and just not really functioning, he looked at me with that charity that I spoke about before, and he said, "Corinne, the light in you is too bright to fail." And so I say that to everybody watching, everybody listening. The light in you is too bright to fail, no matter what it is that you think that you are stuck with or are going through, or that it's a problem that's just always going to be there. Remember that the light in you is too bright to fail. We're already home. We're already safe. We just have to accept that. So our success and the outcome is guaranteed. And that is a wonderful, wonderful thing.
It absolutely is. And that is the magnificent paradox, is the fact that while this all seems real, it is already resolved and finished and in the can. So
thank goodness.
yes, I thank you ever so much for an absolutely delightful chat, especially on a Monday morning here. Nice way to start the week.
Absolutely.
And we'll be getting the message out. So Corinne is going to be traveling before too much longer and interacting with people who are ready to let go of their anxiety.
Absolutely. And hopefully I'll be in Chicago. I hope to meet you in person.
I think that would be wonderful. Thanks so much, Corinne.
Thank you so much for having me. Take care.
You too.